to assign work to executives and members can help you avoid, identify, and manage engagement issues. The first step is to actually assign work. Your executives and members are there to do something. They're there because they believe in the cause or engaged by the community. Giving them something to do is the beginning of engaging them. Tied to this is the idea that you don't want to waste their time. Right? So if you ask them to do something like come to a meeting or a brainstorming session, make sure they're genuinely needed there and that if they're asked to give ideas, those ideas are used. Assign specific tasks to specific people. The easiest way to have something fall through the cracks and then to feel as if, oh, my members aren't engaged, my executives aren't engaged, is to assign a general task that people don't really understand to a general group of people so they don't really know whose responsibility it is. Fourthly, set a check-in date and a drop-dead date. Now, most people know to say, okay, when you do this, do it by then. Of course, it's a good habit to get into to actually set that drop-dead date. But few people in their action plans build in the check-in date. So, for example, if the due date, the drop-dead date, is in 3 weeks, that's when it absolutely has to be done by. Make sure to set a date a week in advance, 10 days in advance, where you check in, say, is it still going to be done in that time? Has anything changed? Right? And tied to this check-in date, the idea is something needs to be possible to come out of it. Tied to this idea of the check-in date is, okay, so what happens if you're not on track, right? You need to have a backup plan. And that means building in right from the start, who is the understudy? Who is the person who takes over if the first person who's assigned the task can't do it? Right? This gives them an opportunity to save face. You don't want to embarrass them. You don't want to make it so that if they can't do it, they have reasons to hide it from everybody until the absolute last second when they have to just admit it. Right? That is a recipe for disaster. Give each of your members and executive a way to bow out gracefully. And the easiest way to do it is to already have a second person ready, willing, and waiting to take on the task so that it was all just part of the process. It wasn't something exceptional. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a big deal. This is a great way to keep your members and executives engaged. Now, the next piece of advice I give, it may seem obvious, but it's often the most obvious things, the simplest things that go the farthest. Write it down. Right? When somebody is assigned a task, write it down. Take note of every action coming out of every meeting, coming out of every personal conversation. Just write it down somewhere. And as we talked about in another module, save it in the drive. Save it somewhere where everyone can see. The flip side of giving people opportunities to save face is keeping people accountable to each other. And that means having a record of who's supposed to do what, someplace public, someplace accessible. Finally, spread the work fairly. It's very tempting to give your most engaged executives and members the most work. After all, they're the most reliable, they're the ones most likely to do it. The sad flip side of this is that when that happens, they end up getting overworked, and then even your most engaged executives and members burn out, and they can't keep up with all their tasks. Spreading the work fairly, constantly asking yourself the question, does X need to do this, or could somebody else do it for once, is a great way to keep everybody within their limits, which you should know, going back to setting clear expectations, getting everybody within their limits, happy, engaged, and their time well used.